this session this morning, and I also want to acknowledge Carolina Hernandez from OHCHR, which is also the other organization leading this work within the context of the network. So before I hand over to David, who's going to walk us through the discussions with the panel members that we have lined up as discussion starters today, I'd like to give ourselves a bit of a reflection of where we're at in terms of the accomplishments so far. Clearly, we can say that the growth of the UN network on migration in terms of its field presence has been absolutely incredible. But now, indeed, the critical issue upon us is how we best leverage the global, the regional, and the national layers of the UN network on migration so that we can indeed make fast progress now on the implementation of the Global Compact on migration. So which are the synergies that we need to look at? What are the potential gaps that we have? And how do we best engage with stakeholders in a context of constrained resources? So I hope these are some of the elements that we will be talking about in our discussions now. So let me recall a bit some of the foundational work that we have done, that we have accomplished in the past couple of years and that we can build from. First of all, I'd like to turn to the work that has been done with and through UN country teams, acknowledging the importance of UN country teams in order to really embed the implementation of the Global Compact on migration within the work of the network, within the work of UN country teams, within the work that the UN delivers on the ground to support sustainable development. Clearly acknowledging the deep roots of the Global Compact on migration with the 2030 agenda. So a big part of what has been accomplished is really to try to equip UN country teams with the right level of understanding of how migration as a cross-cutting issue needs to be embedded within common country analysis, within cooperation framework. And this has been done in the form of a training material that has been now rolled out in its piloting phase in 6 UN country teams across all continents. And I'm happy to report that through the involvement of 18 UN agencies, we have over 100 participants that have been receiving this training in 2021. But now, of course, comes the whole critical issue of the sustainability of this training and really how we can roll it out at scale. And it is really one of the elements that we want to be able to discuss in our discussions today, particularly when it comes to how we can best leverage the regional layer of the UN network on migration as being really the hub, so to speak, in order to further roll out this material to make sure that it is contextualized within specific regions, within specific countries, as it has been, really one of the strong lessons learned from the piloting, that this contextualization is indeed absolutely key. So really working on how we can best do this is an important element, I hope, of our discussions, how we can best, for example, work with DCO to really embed this training offer within what is being made accessible to UN country teams around the world. These are some of the leads for our discussion moving on. Now, I'd like to turn to the second important pillar of this work, which is what we have done towards in order to support the governments themselves. And particularly, we have focused a lot of our efforts on issuing implementation guidance for governments. And we have done so in partnership with the champion countries of the Global Compact on migration, really to ensure ownership and to make sure that we were issuing guidance that really was meeting the needs of the governments. There, I'd like to mention that really 2022 is going to be the critical year for rolling this work it's in countries in the context of constrained resources. So we do have indeed support from the European Commission to do this work in a handful of countries, but this is not going to cut it. So one of the critical elements that I'd like us to be able to discuss today is how we can build synergies and how can we best leverage the resources that we have within UN country teams to facilitate the implementation of the Global Compact on migration and how we are, in other words, engaging with governments in a cross-cutting manner and putting the GCM as a critical element for their consideration. So leveraging our resources is an important element, hopefully, of what we will be able to discuss, as well as the resources of the network members, because let's remember that this work is not in the hands of the UN system alone, but we really need to reach out with, and make synergies with what our other stakeholders on the ground can achieve. Third, but not least, I'd like now to turn to the work that has been done in the context of the Migration Network Hub. As you know, the Migration Hub is one of the critical elements of the capacity building mechanism of the GCM. And there are many really relevant and important features within the Network Hub. But let me emphasize one recently launched element, that is this repository of practices. And there again, how we best utilize this repository of practices hopefully is going to be one of the elements of our conversation, in particular because these practices are so critical as we are leading towards the IMRF. So it's not so much what you can do for the hub in terms of contributing to it, but also how the hub can become really something that is an actively utilized tool in the daily work within countries. So again, hearing your voice on that will be very important, so that really the Migration Hub can pick up steam at the country level. And here I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleague Caroline Mays, who's leading on this work within the context of the network in this particular session. So I'm sure she will be also able to come in as the discussion unfolds. So without further ado, I'd like now to turn to David to lead us through the discussion with the panelists. Thank you very much.
Merci Cécile. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm David Coudur. I work at UNDP, based in New York. It's a little bit early here, but I'm very pleased to have all of you here. We are going to start with 3 panelists who are going to kickstart the discussion on this country and regional implementation. First, we will have, Mrs. Jita Sabarval, who is the UN resident coordinator in Thailand. She will be followed by Dalia Abulfotu, who is economist at the FAO in the regional office for the Near East and North Africa. And then we will have Vivienne Shu, who is Asia Pacific regional coordinator at IDC, the International Detention Coalition. So the purpose of this session is to focus on the linkages between the networks at the global, regional, and country levels for support implementation of the Global Compact for Migration, and also how can the network ensure support in countries where the UN presence is limited. So this is what we are going to discuss. We will share with you some guiding questions after our panelists have first talked. But I will start asking a question to Mrs. Jita Sabarval, with the experience of the implementation of the GCM in Thailand. And I would like to know, and we would like all of us to know, based on your experience in Thailand, what do country networks need from the network at the global and regional levels to support GCM implementation? How would you say that we can strengthen linkages between the networks at the global, regional, and country levels to support this implementation? And for you, and as a resident coordinator in Thailand, what have been the results from the training pilot we have been coordinating from the 2.1 working group, and what else is needed to achieve a UN system strengthening to support countries to implement the GCM at country level? So, Mrs. Sabarval, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, David, and I hope you've got your cup of coffee with you. We can assure you we are going to be very focused in our interventions and keep it moving pretty rapidly. So thank you all for the opportunity to contribute to the 3rd annual meeting of the UN Network on Migration, both to learn from your experiences and share the perspectives of the UN country team in Thailand. For Asia Pacific and Thailand in particular, it's critical to integrate migration across the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, which is now being reviewed by the Cabinet. In this context, I want to look at three issues: effective policy advice, joint governance, and strengthening the UN country team to advance the Global Compact on migration. As you know, Thailand is a destination for over 4 million migrants who arrive through both regular and irregular channels. The country hosts half of all the migrants from across the Southeast Asia, constituting 10% of the total labor force and contributing to anywhere between 4 to 7% of the GDP. In an aging society, migrants are going to become increasingly important to the social and economic welfare of the country here in Thailand. I want to highlight that gender is integral to this work, affecting female migrants' experiences and contributions, as well as risks associated with human trafficking and gender-based violence. Last year, during the consultations across the country, migrant communities identified three key priorities: employment security and skills development, health services, and discrimination, all of which we have mainstreamed in the cooperation framework. As a global compact champion country, Thailand is scaling up access to healthcare and basic services for regular migrants and hopefully irregular migrants as well. However, during the pandemic, the informal economy's little to non-existent access to social protection schemes has left many migrant families extremely vulnerable. UN technical assistance on social protection is emphasizing improving the transferability of benefits, mobility between the formal and the informal economy, and avoiding fragmentation by building on existing schemes to include both the regular and irregular migrants. As a case in point, we are engaging with the government to see that domestic workers, the majority of whom are women migrants, have access under labor laws to social protection. Another area is alternates to detention for migrant children, which requires further advocacy to make the policy commitments meaningful in the country. We are also piloting the use of blockchain technology to secure transparent contracts that could be altered to protect labor rights and ensure payments in collaboration with a tech company called DigiNex. We will be measuring our progress through two migration governance indicators in our results framework, which focus on migration policies and labor markets. We recognize that currently we only have 20% of the SDG data related to migrants available for Thailand. And as part of our cooperation framework, we are in dialogue with the government to explore how best we can fill this data gap. It's important to point out that the guidance notes by the Global Network on Migration has been very helpful to us in Thailand, specifically in relation to alternates to detention for migrant children, and more recently in the context of Myanmar, which enabled the country team to more effectively advocate on protection of migrants from Myanmar and track their flow on a regular basis. The cooperation framework through the Network on Migration Thailand provides a good model for joint governance by bringing government, the private sector, and civil society, including migrant groups themselves. IOM has played a key leadership role in making this possible and leveraging the network to provide a platform for effective advocacy. For example, partnering with the government and the private sector to extend migrants' work permits during the pandemic. This model of governance is being considered by other thematic groups across the UN country team as we prepare to deliver on a cooperation framework. To conclude, I want to focus on strengthening the country team's capacity. As you know, Thailand was the first country in the Asia Pacific to pilot training on integrating migration into CCAs and CFs, which was good timing as we were embarking on co-creating the cooperation framework. Along with UN heads of agencies, we jointly set the direction on migration governance and its relevance to the 2030 agenda with an excellent interagency facilitation team composed of IOM, UNDP, and ILO colleagues. I recommend that these trainings become available to all members of the country team and the network on a more regular basis. This is key to build a common set of expertise and facilitate coordination as more agencies engage in migration-related issues and programs. Ahead of the IMRF, and as we continue discussion with the government and the country team, I see a key role for the regional and global networks to share good practices and recommendations to support the organization of inclusive consultations on the implementation of the GCM. So thank you again for this invitation. I look forward to your questions during the Q&A session.
Thanks so much, Mrs. Sabharwal, for this very concrete intervention, straight to the point, and somehow with many lessons for the other countries in different regions, for highlighting the importance of having gender and children inclusive policies and programming. So that's really very highlighting. I would like to move now from after this country experience to the regional dimension of the GCM implementation. I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Dalia Abul-Fotou, who again is an economist at the FAO Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa. And Mrs. Abul-Fotou, the questions I have for you is, so from the regional level, what would you say should be the role of regional networks in supporting country-level implementations? What are the gaps you would identify from your experience in Africa, and can we address them moving forward? And finally, how can we strengthen linkages, again, between the networks at the global, regional, and country levels to support the implementation of the Global Compact? Over to you, Mrs. Abul-Fotou.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're from. I'm honored to be here and to contribute to the third annual network meeting. As you noted, I'm speaking on behalf of the Regional Network on Migration for Arab States, which was formally launched in April 2020. And the purpose is basically ensuring effective, timely, and coordinated support to the 22 member states in our region in the implementation and follow-up of the GCM. And we're comprised of 17 UN agencies. The network is very cognizant of the fact that GCM implementation must be state-led, whole of government, whole of society, and of course, cannot be based on a one-size-fits-all approach. And with this in mind, over the last 2 years, the regional network has worked closely with the League of Arab States in the organization of 2 capacity building workshops last year, which helped familiarize member state focal points with the review process and guide them through the templates for the voluntary GCM reviews. We also collaborated with the League of Arab States on a member states consultation to discuss modalities and dates for the regional review conference, as well as the GCM regional review itself, which took place in February of this year. It's worth mentioning that in the span of 5 months from October 2020 to February this year, the network helped organize a total of 6 stakeholder dialogues or consultations, including ones that were specifically dedicated to interstate consultative mechanisms, also known as regional consultative processes, one for parliamentarians in the Arab region, and a regional stakeholder consultation on women, migrant workers, migrant children, and youth, which was led by UNICEF and UN Women. And of course, the outcome reports of all of these meetings can be found on the UN Network on Migration website on the Arab States Regional Network page. And I think one thing that can be learned from our experience is that the regional network is in a strong position to foster this cross-country exchange and learning, and also to act as a convener, especially where it's difficult to bring together the diverse actors that are needed to ensure cohesive GCM implementation. At the GCM regional review, there were more than 800 participants from 18 member countries, member states joining, including ministers and high-level government officials, as well as a really wide range of stakeholders. And just to highlight a few outcomes of that, 14 of the 22 Arab states submitted their voluntary GCM review reports, reflecting considerable progress in achieving GCM objectives, particularly objectives 1 to 10 and 23. Most countries have established platforms for the implementation of the GCM, and there's 12 national networks in our region, which the regional network supports and works with. A good example of this is in Morocco, which is a champion country, and where the regional network has supported in the delivery of the training rollout for UNCT on mainstreaming migration in the Common Country Assessment, or CCA. And that is something that we hope to replicate in other countries. And also prior to the regional review, the regional network also supported national consultations in countries like Tunisia, Libya, Iraq, to coordinate the work at country level and coordinate their positions. And looking forward to the International Migration Review Forum next year, the network has already implemented one member state briefing and will continue to support countries as well as stakeholders to effectively engage in that process. And the next regional dialogue will take place around February, which is 1 year after the GCM regional review, and will allow us to collectively look back and take stock of progress, as well as ramp up efforts in the subsequent 2.5 months leading up to the forum. And of course, at the IMRF itself, the network will have a role to play in organizing a number of roundtables, capacity development events for countries, supporting our champion countries in the region, and in ensuring that countries can learn from each other's experience. So just to conclude, we found that by creating these spaces and platforms for regular communication, flow of knowledge, dialogue, consultation, the regional network plays an important role as a conduit of knowledge and as a convener, and in the process of transferring ownership. And that's really important, especially in a region where it can be difficult to get everyone, the whole of society, whole of government, at the same table. Thank you very much once again. And I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Mrs. Aboulfotou, and thanks for sharing this experience in the Arab states. Indeed, international migration by nature involves at least 2 countries, and many times more countries than 2, and therefore it's this regional dialogue is absolutely key. As well as the cross-country exchange that you have mentioned. And we are also happy from the UN network that you think that the training that we have been developing from the network and from the working group has been useful, in particular in the case of Morocco. So thanks for sharing these experiences. I would like now to move to the experience at this other stakeholder point of view with Mrs. Vivienne Chou, who is Asia Pacific Regional Coordinator for the International Detention Coalition. And Mrs. Chou, I would like to ask you, how are stakeholders engaging at country and regional level, so beyond the UN system? What has been achieved through stakeholder engagement, and what are the gaps, and what can we learn from this? Over to you, Mrs. Chou.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share some reflections. I have to just start by saying that my internet connection is a little bit unstable, so I may be a bit antisocial and turn off my camera if it doesn't hold up, but I'll leave it on in the meantime. So as a global civil society coalition with presence at all levels, IDC has been participating in the regional and global networks. And specifically, we've been participating in the ATD thematic work stream at the Asia Pacific level, and also co-chairing the ATD working group at the global level. We've been actively working with our members on GCM implementation at the national level as well, with a very specific focus on Objective 13 and ending immigration detention, particularly of children and families, and then advocating for and developing rights-based ATD. So the comments I'll make will be primarily in relation to the work that we are doing in the Asia-Pacific region, and also engagement with the network and GCM implementation at the regional and national levels in this particular region. So we are working on a number of initiatives relating to GCM implementation and preparation for the IMRF. And these include, but are not limited to, the following. So at the regional level, IDC is undertaking a detailed mapping, which Pia spoke of earlier, of the detention and ATD context, including promising practices in approximately 20 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And this is in partnership with the ATD thematic workstream of the regional network, as well as the global network. And a really quick note just to say that we're also undertaking similar mapping in other regions, and we will be launching a global report on the detention context and promising practices in ATD in the lead up to and in support of preparations for the IMRF. And at the national level, we are working closely with a number of governments, and in particular, we're working with the Thai government on 2 initiatives that we hope to highlight at the IMRF, including working with the Thai Department of Children and Youth, as well as UNICEF, to develop a monitoring and evaluation framework to assess implementation of Thailand's ATD MOU for children and families in immigration detention. We're also working on a children and youth consultation to bring the voices of migrant and refugee children and youth to the development of the GCM National Plan of Action and the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of Children in the Context of Migration. And this is being done again in partnership with the Thai Department of Children and Youth, UNICEF, and Tergazom. In terms of reflections on what has worked and how to strengthen engagement at the Asia-Pacific region, I have 3 key reflections, and I was really glad to hear that some of these have already been touched upon in the previous session. So firstly, several of our civil society members in the region are engaged at the global network. Their presence has been extremely beneficial for the network, as well as national level advocacy efforts. And this type of multi-stakeholder collaboration at the regional level would no doubt also be extremely useful. Secondly, we've had a series of reflections at the regional level on how best the ATD thematic workstream can complement existing initiatives. So for example, IDC and the Asia Dialogue on Forced Migration, which is a track 1.52 dialogue, we have been convening a regional peer learning platform on alternative care arrangements for children and their families in the context of migration. And the question we've been discussing is, how can we best ensure that we're not duplicating efforts? But instead, how are we actually identifying gaps that can be filled? So for example, could there be similar peer learning initiatives that focus on other populations at risk of detention or who are in immigration detention? Or could we look at peer learning initiatives that focus on the targeted engagement of security and immigration officials? Because I think this is quite a gap in the region. The third point, and this was one that was touched upon quite a lot in the previous session, it's engagement with migrants and refugees in a way that really enables their leadership and meaningful input and participation in GCM implementation. There have been really important efforts at the regional level through different initiatives, but I think we all recognize that we do need to engage a much wider number of stakeholders, and we need to take an intersectional approach in doing this. Ray shared some really good points earlier on this, and I won't repeat them, but I do want to add that I think this really requires intentional, targeted, and sustained work at the national level in ways that recognize the resource and the security constraints that migrants and refugees face. I wanted to just wrap up by also agreeing with what was said earlier, that we do absolutely need to strengthen linkages between the networks at the global, regional, and country levels. And IDC is in many ways uniquely placed to because we have the presence and, we work at all three levels. And really, we have been working and reflecting on this since the beginning of our engagement with the network. And in particular, how we do this without hampering or duplicating existing work, and how to really reinforce the significant work that's already been done by civil society, by grassroots, and by refugee and migrant leaders. Some of the things that we have or we're currently doing to link the three levels, the national, regional, and the global, include this mapping initiative described earlier, as well as various global peer learning events that bring together governments at all three levels. It's really critical that we continue to work with and engage with government, civil society, and other stakeholders consistently at all levels, so that the work at the national level informs global discussions and vice versa. I know we're probably out of time here, so I'll leave it at that and look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vivian. And I would take just one thing that you said, which is super important, not that the rest was not, but not duplicating efforts. I think we are not very good sometimes at the UN in not duplicating efforts, but I think that also the network is working in that direction and precisely to create synergy. So it's very interesting what this experience you have brought in terms of multi-stakeholders coordination and between the different levels. So thanks for bringing this experience from Asia Pacific. Now I would like to give the floor back to my colleague Cécile for the Q&A session. Over to you, Cécile. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. So indeed, now we have a little bit under an hour to really open the floor and hear your reflections. So I really want to invite 138 participants that are right now connected to really come forward with your thoughts, with your recommendations, and we're really trying to have a very practical conversation as much as possible. So if you want to raise your hands, what would be great as well is to facilitate the flow of the discussion, is that maybe if you could ask for the floor, so by using the chat function and clearly indicating your name as well as your affiliation, so that would be helpful. And I really hope that we're going to hear from all the different voices that are within the network. So we spoke about the critical role of stakeholders in the conversation just now, and how instrumental that is to really make all of this work very concrete and really take roots in real migration context within countries. So I'd like now to open the floor, and if you could as well keep your interventions quite brief, very practical, as I said, and if you have follow-up questions to the speakers, of course, you're very welcome to do that. So who wants to break the ice? I have Michelle Levoy. Please, you have the floor, Michelle. Very nice seeing you.
Thanks, Cécile. Civil society will always volunteer to break the ice. So nice to see you too. Thanks very much for all the input. I was actually reflecting a little bit on what I think it was Dalia was talking about, the process in the Middle East region and bringing the countries together, the regional review. And I was just wondering for reflection about, I think it's also because we see in some, and maybe also linked to what IDC was talking about, like a contentious issue, which is detention and alternatives to detention. And civil society is unpacking a lot of these more like issues which are maybe seen as more contentious, but I wonder if in the governmental spaces, there's also room to unpack these in an objective way. And I wonder if the network and the various members of the network can play a role in helping to do that. So for example, just to give you an example from the European region, Ireland last week announced its regularization program. Portugal has had one the past year. Italy has had one. So the issue of regularization is a key issue. We know that, for this European region, but also for other regions of the world. But even in the negotiations for the Global Compact, it was maybe hard to see governments themselves maybe talking as openly about that practice. Other practices like access to healthcare for undocumented migrants, for example. Many countries do it, but how can maybe we find ways to stimulate objective discussions from countries themselves at fora like, as Dalia was describing, the regional ones, or in the Global Compact, the IMRF itself? And how can the network maybe play a role in this? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone would like to provide some answers to this really critical question raised by Michelle? Indeed, how we leveraging the network really to bring these critical issues on the agenda of the member states. I think one will be interesting to see how the IMRF is going to be utilized in that way. But also, indeed, how we're building these, through the regional layer of the network, and particularly as we went through the regional consultation. Now we are preparing for the reviews, the voluntary reviews for the IMRF. So that seems to be a very important moment to bring those points forward. So that would be maybe some reflections from my side, but I was wondering whether there were participants that like to also offer their views on this aspect. I don't see any hand raised. This is your time to speak, really. I think that's really important because we have 1 hour to really review jointly how we make this work the best way. So really, please do come forward with your thoughts. And now welcoming Christian Wolf that came to the rescue. Over to you, Christian.
Thanks, Cecile. Sorry for taking the floor again, and also sorry for not providing an immediate answer for that. But another question, perhaps, or a reflection. Having listened to the presentation, and thank you very much for those. I was struck by the relatively high level of abstraction, let's say, of the issues that were being discussed in the presentations. And I say that, having been a member of and having worked with the network on developing some of the content that you presented earlier and that we talked about. So, we've been participating both in the work stream on capacity building for UN country teams and in the work stream on building country level capacity. And I think it's been a really interesting experience working with UN agencies and with other stakeholders to develop this content together. However, I do wonder, having listened to the presentations, and maybe presenters can return to that a little bit in their responses. What has the experience been like transferring this into a real life context? Because it's one of the things, we as an organization, for example, didn't have the capacity to directly participate in the facilitation team. But one of the questions we had was, and I appreciate the importance, for example, of capacity building UN country teams, but it's also a very highly technically specific activity. And I think somebody else, Dalia, mentioned how the network has been instrumental in transferring ownership of the GCM and GCM related topics to the country level. I was wondering, in those steps, so whether it's in the discussions of the training or other ancillary discussions that have been had around that, to what extent have agencies and their partners been able to involve civil society and other stakeholders? Because what we often talk about in our own organization and in discussions with others, and what Viviana, I think, highlighted quite nicely was this task of linking the local realities with global processes. And I wonder if, is there an added value, or how can we strengthen the added value of doing a very specific targeted capacity building, in this case for country teams, for example, and using that as an opportunity also to promote multi-stakeholder engagement and the whole idea in the GCM of promoting multi-stakeholder collaboration. It seems to me sometimes, at least when we get these reports back, that it's still quite a siloed technical discussion. So just a bit of feedback, perhaps maybe from the presenters or from others on what has the experience been like, and how can we make sure that actually this is not just an introspective exercise and a necessary technical one, but also one which actually does bring in others, because I feel like the bar institutionally and in terms of language is sometimes quite high, whereas the needs on the ground are quite great. So how is there a way to build in going forward, you know, if we do a 2.0 of the guidance, for example, or if we involve other countries, to really make sure that it's a good and collaborative process? Thanks.
Many thanks, Christian. I really like that very, very direct question. And maybe just from my side, I think we have to see this as different layers, that they are mutually reinforcing each other. But it is very clear that 2022 needs to be the year where we see this active involvement of civil society picking up and actually doing it and plugging it with the work of the UN country team, because I think there is definitely there a lot of complementarities that need to be found. And it is very much, in fact, in the ethos of the UN development system reform, whereby UN country teams, as they're moving forward with UN planning, need to engage all stakeholders. So that's very much part and parcel of what we need to do. And clearly the GCM implementation is a unique opportunity to put that to in reality and really have stakeholders within countries taking part in this overall understanding of what can be done in the country context to influence sustainable development outcomes. But I would think as well that as we're moving forward with the work with the governments themselves, which is the second pillar of what is upon us, this involvement of civil society will become much more concrete. As you know very well, Christian, we have worked on embedding, in fact, civil society organizations within this process, within the guidance that we are providing to governments, but we need to make this happen in reality. And clearly the issue is one of resources, as I was trying to allude to in my introduction. So how do we bridge that gap that is upon us? That's a really critical aspect of the conversation that we're having now. But these are just some preliminary thoughts in reaction to your excellent intervention. So maybe, David, if you allow me, maybe to bounce back maybe that question to some of our discussion starters, if anyone would like to come forward. I see Dalia just put on her camera. So Dalia, I give you the floor.
Yes, forgive me also for turning off my camera. So I did want to go back to the earlier point on alternative to detention, that we do have global network guidance, and the regional review was an opportunity to discuss this in more depth. And one of the recommendations that was highlighted in the voluntary national reviews submitted was very much dedicated to this. And a recommendation of the regional review was that alternatives to immigration detention must be implemented, and detention of migrant children should be banned in national legislation, and appropriate care and reception should be provided. So it is a critical issue that continues to be an important area of focus through consultations with stakeholders, which brings me to the second question about civil society. And this is critically important in our region, as I'm sure it is in other regions. And that is why the network has, in addition to the platforms and communication consultations done with member states, we've also been keen to always pair that with civil society and multi-stakeholder consultations, usually taking place in parallel right after and during, and this is something that it goes beyond also civil society. So sometimes it's really critical also to have within the government different, within the country different actors. So media representatives who are communicating on issues of migration, to have universities or academia who are conducting research and informing the latest information and shaping the the discussion. So these people different actors are brought to the table and engaged in all of the processes and meetings and consultation platforms. And so that's it's a very well taken, an important point to factor in. Over.
Many, many thanks. I'd like now to give the floor to Gita.
Thank you, Cecile. I wanted to come in more from a country team perspective, and I know my colleague is there as well, Geraldine. She's online, and Geraldine, please feel free to step in. And from a country team perspective, where we are at a point where we are seeking endorsement, final stages of seeking endorsement of the cooperation framework. As soon as we seek endorsement, we are graduating to developing a joint work plans. And developing a joint work plans can be a pretty competitive process within a country team context. However, in the context of Thailand, given that we've had the training on migration, it's resulted in two things. One, it's definitely resulted in raised awareness on how important it is to tackle the issue of migrants, both regular and irregular, in a strategic way, addressing it from the lens of rights and addressing it from the lens of services, just because they're so critical to the economy of a country. The second thing that it has allowed us to do is it's allowed us as a country team to realize that as we develop our flagships on South-South triangular cooperation, migration should be a potential theme that becomes one of the flagships that the country team champions together with the government and member states. So this allows us to do two things. It allows us to not just mobilize resources for a project, which hopefully will happen anyway if the flagship is good enough, but more importantly, it brings these different actors together, working in the country and across the region in carrying some of the good practices and even learning from other countries across the region, right? And I feel that the very fact that the country team believes that migration should be one of our flagships is in many ways a win-win situation for us and evidence for the training that has been provided by you people at the country level. So I'm going to pause here, and in fact, I'm going to ask Geraldine if she wants to come in to supplement this point. Geraldine, over to you.
Thank you, Gita. If Cecile will allow me. Okay. So maybe just and so I'm Geraldine. I'm the Chief of Mission for IOM in Thailand, but I'm also the UN network coordinator in country. So I was just trying to think also a bit more practically on a relationship with the regional and global level and how we can enhance the cooperation also with different levels. And again, the network is quite new. I've been the coordinator for 1 year. We've worked now on a work plan with the team here, with the country network, with key priorities. We're also engaging with the civil society, but also the line ministries to try to work on some of the issues. And ATD, for instance, is one. And just hearing also our colleagues from the region from on the ATD elements, I realized that I think we still have some work to do to connect the dots, right? And to connect the work and the discussions that we have within the network at the country level and the discussions that are happening at the regional level with a number of agencies. Because even though some of the agencies at the regional level are also members of the country network, they're not the same people. They're not necessarily aware of what is being discussed at the regional level. And I still think that there is a gap currently that we need to bridge to ensure that whatever is happening, at the global or regional level that involves a country where there is a network is flagged to us. Maybe something that could be also interesting is to make sure that both at the global and the regional level, the teams are aware of the priorities that we have in each country, so that you can also flag to us when events are taking place, when actually a guidance note is being prepared and can be useful to certain countries. Maybe dedicated briefings could be organized also on these specific guidance notes when it's a priority for the country. I'm also thinking that so far I haven't feel the necessarily the joint discussion with all country network coordinators. And maybe this is something we need to look at as well. And I will be happy to hear from other country coordinators what they feel. But I think it would be, at least for me, I find it would be useful to have specific meetings where all country coordinators, whichever agency they form, discuss, best practices so far, lessons learned, key elements that have been bringing some positive outcomes in their negotiations with the governments, or in bringing different partners together to do consultations in the lead up to the IMRF as well. There's a lot of things that could be discussed, and so far I feel like maybe this is something we could work on a bit further to try to empower, let's say, coordinators in the country. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Geraldine, thank you so much. And I'm sure that David was taking a lot of notes as he will be wrapping up the session, because I think you provided us with some very concrete entry points. And I'm going to push my luck a little bit and maybe ask to probe you to maybe go a bit, not deeper, but just reflect on how, in relation to everything that you just told us, what could be the role that the Migration Hub could play? Because you've been talking about, better taking stock of the priorities of the different country networks, put them together, really be able, therefore, to monitor how this work evolves, learning from each other. Do you think the Migration Hub could have a role to play in order to facilitate this kind of peer exchange among coordinators within different country contexts? That's one question. And second of all, how would you like to react to Christian's request for the network to be a bit more anchored in realities and open towards stakeholders, and really bring in the critical issue that civil society organizations would like to put on the table of governments? So how do you think we can best achieve that? And that's a question for you, Geraldine, but I'm also, of course, opening that question to everyone in the audience, and of course our panel members.
So I'll start. Oh, sorry. Please, Vivian, go ahead.
Okay, Anna, thank you. I just wanted to perhaps respond to a few of those points, and maybe just drive home the point of civil society again. I think the first question about how to engage governments and to get them to, I suppose, want to work on and champion some of the more difficult issues in the GCM. And I think here the role of civil society, particularly national organizations, is really critical. We see this so clearly in relation to detention and ATD, where we have seen the most traction when national civil society organizations are taking the lead, because migration is, it can be a sensitive issue. It can raise issues around national security, enforcement, and often we find that the groups that are most able to have conversations are the ones that have worked in that context for a very long time and are nationals of that country. So strategically, I think it is critical to have their engagement and their guidance on how best to engage governments on this. I think the other element was something that others had touched on, which was just how we work with different arms of government. Obviously the government isn't a homogenous unit, and different agencies and governments will have different views on different aspects of the GCM and different populations within the country. And I think often there is a tendency to perhaps engage the ones that are most willing to listen and most willing to talk. And so when I made the point about very targeted engagement of security agencies and immigration officers, I think much more needs to be done to work with them, because often they are the ones that are making the decisions on issues relating to the GCM. And so what we've seen also work very well is the sort of multi-stakeholder approach, where we bring together civil society, academics, different arms of government, including foreign affairs as well, but also human rights commissions. And I think through that approach, we've seen quite a lot of traction at the national level. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe those are the 2 points I wanted to make for now, and I'll hand over back to you, Geraldine.
So over to you, Geraldine. Thanks a lot, Viviane.
Thanks, Viviane. I'm not sure I have so much to add, but on the hub, yeah, I mean, definitely this is something that should be discussed. And I agree that, if I know that the regional level and the regional network have recently started to do a mapping with all the country network to try to identify what were everyone's priorities. So I think this is also something that is being discussed at the regional level, but definitely, having more targeted follow-up from the hub potentially and monitoring on the priorities, but also flagging when guidance notes are coming or capacity building opportunities on very specific topic, I would think, not necessarily the general migration mainstreaming training, could be super useful to us. On the civil society side, I mean, this is something that we've expanded the network in Thailand to include the Migrants Working Group, which is a group of dozens of NGOs and international NGOs working on migration. And obviously, this is for us a priority. We're also supporting them to meet regularly once a month. We also have sub-working group, and some of them, and I heard from the session before, this importance of using local language and local context. Some of the working group for the network actually held on, in Thai language and with experts at the local level to discuss some of these issues. So there's definitely something that we think is super useful. And following up on what Viviane said, we have now also some engagement with the parliament and with some committees or subcommittees on different elements, which whether it's around labor and labor rights for migrants, potentially around detention as well. And I agree that we need to engage a broad range of stakeholders on these issues. But again, it would be super useful for us to also understand what's happening at the regional level and at the global level a bit more systematically. Over.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Geraldine. Much appreciated. So I'm looking at the chat and I don't see any intervention lined up. So if you allow me, I'd like now to maybe call upon Carolyn from the Migration Hub. Maybe, Carrie, if you would like to come forward and maybe reflect a little bit on what has been said with the potential linkages that we could see with the Hub in order to strengthen the way it's being used, particularly from the country level perspective. So Carolyn, if you want, you could take the floor now.
Thank you. I put my video on. I can't see whether or not it's actually working.
It is working. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Cecile, also for giving me this opportunity to take the floor. I'm taking notes copiously in hearing all of the interventions that are coming through. And I'm certainly hearing opportunities for how we can be better focusing on the Hub. So maybe if I can even premise these initial remarks just to even highlight, I mean, it's going to be a rhetorical question because it's an online platform, but I think I would like to ask, I mean, how much are people currently engaging on the Hub? How much do they actually see the Hub as part of the work and their daily work and their association when they think of GCM? Are you thinking about the Hub? Are you thinking about what the Hub can be providing as a tool, as a resource for GCM implementation? And are you aware of all the different opportunities associated with the Hub? And so I know that these are rhetoric type questions, but I mean, of course, anyone can provide an intervention on that. But I have a feeling that the overwhelming answer to this is going to be there's not enough information about the Hub. There's not enough engagement or momentum or interaction at the country level and at the regional level in particular on the Hub. Because the Hub has been, as you know, it was only launched in May of 2021. It's still quite young, and its features have been being advanced at an incremental level. And so there's a lot of work that's still happening, and that's still going to be happening going forward. And that's why I'm finding this particular opportunity really interesting, because it is a window of opportunity also to be shaping how the Hub can be targeting and better tailoring some of its responses for its inputs and its new functions and features. Some of the things that I've been hearing, I mean, particularly in this session, of course, is how to empower civil society, how to empower UNCTs, connecting the dots between the global level, the regional level, and the national level on information. And this certainly does have a role. The hub can certainly be helping to connect. There's discussion spaces, which we could be using, and inviting different stakeholders across the board, being more targeted and more tailoring in terms of the types of events and opportunities, using these discussion spaces to bring people together. Coming from even the earlier session that was mentioned, an opportunity to bring in migrant voices. I certainly think in terms of connecting and empowering UNCT coordinators, that is definitely something that is part of what the hub was designed to do, to be able to give information, to be able to collect practices, and to be able to make that information not just available in a repository in a passive way, but to have it available, yes, on a knowledge platform, but to then capitalize on what the GCM envisioned in this connection hub is taking that knowledge and applying it and engaging it and allowing people to easily be informed of what is available out there. Because of course, everyone has really heavy workloads. They don't have time to research and all the different sort of practices and resources are out there. But if we can do it in a very easy and taking advantage of the most technological sort of opportunities that are available, we can start having that really actively engaged better in terms of all the different events that are happening. And I would welcome any opportunity, in fact, to be able to come in and speak about the hub in all of these different forums and to find opportunities, including with respect to the private sector, which was also brought up in the earlier session. I don't want to take up too much time in terms of my remarks, and so do let me know if there's some more particular questions, or if I didn't quite answer some of the questions that were brought up
I think that was great, Caroline, because you kind of really clearly, I think, articulated how the hub could come in and answer some of some of the points that have been raised. So I think that was fantastic, and I really invite the participants to ask potential follow-up questions or come with their own recommendations. I see that we have a hand raised so I'm giving now the floor to Fabienne Wilches. If you could just introduce your organization as you're taking the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecile. This is, okay, thank you. Fabienne from the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. I just wanted to highlight the importance of integrating national human rights institutions in the discussions at national and regional level, and the importance of their broad mandate on human rights, including migrants and refugees in some countries. And it would be also not only to highlight this, but also the question and on how the different organizations and civil society are engaging with national human rights institutions, and also looking forward to the IMRF on the participation of NHRIs in the different round tables. And also the importance of NHRIs connecting civil society with government, and also having this work with really grassroots communities also, and not only monitoring but also reporting on different at different levels. For example, linking the SDGs with the GCM, but also on the involvement with human rights mechanisms in Geneva, for example, with the UPR, the UN Special Rapporteurs, and thinking a little bit on how to link and to have a coherent approach on the different systems at the regional and global level.
Thanks. I think you just raised a very, very important point, is how we are maximizing also the impact of our work, like indeed making those connections with other related frameworks. And you mentioned the 2030 Agenda and human rights instruments, and that is really, really spot on. And just to flag that actually when it comes to the connection with the 2030 Agenda, we are within the context of the network looking into providing guidance to governments so that when they prepare the voluntary national reviews for high-level political forums, so focused on reviewing the achievements towards the 2030 Agenda, that they do embed migration as a cross-cutting consideration. So just wanted to flag this in relation to the very good point that you've made. So I'm looking now, we are a little bit under half an hour before finishing the session, and just wanting to see whether we have other contributions from the floor. We have heard from a number of colleagues in certain parts of the world, but I think we could do better in terms of taking the pulse in terms of how things are working in different for example, my colleagues based in Africa or in the Americas. So I was wondering whether we could have some ideas, coming from those specific regional contexts that didn't really so much come across so far. Calling upon UN colleagues, but as well, of course, civil society organizations, colleagues, other stakeholders. We haven't heard much, I would think, so far from colleagues representing as well cities and local or regional authorities. So I was wondering whether they would want to come forward with their own thinking, knowing that they are doing a lot of work that directly benefits the objective of the network.
Cecile, if I may, I would like to jump in and ask a question to the colleagues. Sometimes I have the feeling from our experience that the UN network and the UN system is pushing a lot for the implementation of the Global Compact, while the governments who endorse the Global Compact sometimes are reluctant to implement it. And I would like to hear the experiences from the colleagues at the regional or even better at the country levels about what is their experience of working with the governments when they talk to the government about this implementation. What is the feedback, both at the national and local levels? So if you have concrete experiences, and that would be great to hear how it works in your regions and your countries. Thanks. Gita, maybe could you help us?
Okay, we have Timothy. Timothy, you have the floor. Please introduce yourself as you're taking the floor. And I see as well Gita will follow. Thank you, David. Timothy? Timothy, you have the floor. Okay, so can I then, maybe Timothy may have some issues with his microphone. So maybe I'd like to move to Madeleine Page and then go to Gita, if that's okay with you, Gita. Madeleine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cecile. Can you hear me well?
Very well.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm Madeleine. I'm working here in IOM in the United Kingdom. So another I guess quite particular context, just for colleagues here on the call. As you're probably not surprised, the UK doesn't have a kind of country, UN country team, and also we don't have a formal network in place here. So the context is a little bit different, but we do obviously have many actors who are very involved and engaged in GCM implementation, both at the local levels, different city councils, local authorities, and of course many civil society actors who are engaged in the regional and the global stages, as well as those that are sort of more domestically focused. We also have GCM engagement group, which is kind of a number of different civil society actors and UN agencies who've kind of come together to support the UK government in their implementation of the GCM. Something maybe I just wanted to reflect on David's questions in particular, because these are, you know, kind of live discussions that we're having right now with the government, is really kind of looking ahead to the IMRF. How can we support them in the process, in the voluntary reviews and potential civil society consultations? We have a domestic context in the UK, which is perhaps rather challenging at the moment for a number of different reasons. We also have different parts of government that are kind of pulling in different directions, which adds additional challenges. So I think some of the things that we're really thinking about is how to help the government get sign off and really kind of agree to take forward civil society consultations in a meaningful way to support their IMRF preparations, and how we can kind of help them in this advocacy process internally and getting different stakeholders involved in government. And obviously this is something that's shared between different ministries, and they themselves aren't always so linked up. So we're trying to think about different ways that we can support their advocacy and kind of bring them together around the table, and then how we can, you know, make the case for these kinds of multi-stakeholder consultations actually supporting them and you know, we've been having very practical discussions, and this is something that I would really like to see from the network, and something that I've been kind of exchanging with other networks, or perhaps non-networks in other countries, perhaps similar to the UK, is how exactly do we go about doing this, and what are the best practices that other countries have, and how have they kind of gotten on board different ministries to commit to these kinds of processes, and if we are going to run, if consultations do go ahead, how can we do that in a meaningful way and in a practical way? Because, you know, the government has very, I guess, very practical concerns about how much time this is going to take, and the resources it's going to take, and how the process is going to be managed, and how the inputs are going to be used, and, you know, what potential agendas could look like, and all this kind of thing. And we have the network guidance, but from my perspective, it would be really useful to be able to exchange, you know, on a very practical level with other people that are, you know, planning such consultations right now, and in terms of how these discussions are ongoing, because I think, I mean, we're still at the sort of initial process before actually running them and getting people involved and engaged, but it's quite an important time period, because now's the time, and then we can actually run it. So yeah, from my perspective, I think it would be really useful to have these kinds of exchanges with other countries, and I think the network could have a really useful way in bringing together perhaps other countries like ours that have a slightly different you know, setup than perhaps some of the other colleagues on this call. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Madeleine. I think that was again very concrete recommendation and very well noted. I just wanted to recall that also in the guidance that we have put together for government, a lot of those practical steps that you were mentioning in terms of timing, in terms of, you know, who to involve, in terms of the potential pitfalls to avoid, etc. We have really captured that in the guidance to governments. So just to say that now we need indeed to put that to tests by rolling it out at scale, and having a real knowledge management anchored around this, as you're calling for, will be absolutely critical. And again, that's where not only the Migration Hub could be instrumental, but as well, let's recall the engagement that we have with the champion countries that really are a bit of our sounding board as well about how we are best engaging with them and where we're learning from that process. But all your points are very well taken. Thank you so much, Madeleine. David, I'm sure you saw there's a response to your question as well in the chat, whereby basically one stakeholder is saying that when they speak in the Southeast Asia region with governments, it seems that a number of governments have not really heard about the GCM. So it seems that there is still a long way to go. And here, of course, the critical importance of this being a collective task. So this is done through the network, but really engaging the networks of all the individual stakeholders within the network, so that, you know, this work really is done at scale, and the message comes across in efficient manners. So I'd like now to turn to Gita, and then I will try to give the floor again to Timothy if you manage to come online. So Gita, over to you, please.
Thanks, Cecile. Very quickly, I wanted to share a bird's eye kind of picture on this whole issue, right? Remember, we are sitting in an upper middle income country context here in Thailand. And as an upper middle income country context, as I said earlier, migrants will remain central to the growth of the country as the country ages. The government recognizes this, and they know that they need to deal with this issue, if not today, tomorrow, from a much more comprehensive perspective than it's currently being done, right? So that's something that government is aware of. And that's the reason that government has signed up to be a champion country. Otherwise, why would Thailand sign up to be a champion country? Having said this, there's another important dimension to this. Thailand is also looking to position itself as a leader in the Asia-Pacific region, and more specifically in ASEAN, right? And this provides them as that one opportunity, amongst others, to position themselves as a leader, right? And that is what we need to leverage more of as we push the boundaries on some of these very sensitive issues in relation to alternatives to detention, amongst other issues. There are two other quick points that I want to raise, and probably Geraldine, you can come in as well. Sorry, our lights have gone in the office complex here at SCAP. But very quickly, very important to invest in building capacities across the government system to address some of these issues. Not everyone sitting within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Immigration Department or the other parts of the government that we work with understand these issues the way you people understand it. Right? So very important to invest in building capacities, also invest in helping them understand the imperative of having inclusive dialogue processes, which brings civil society into this dialogue early on, right? It's because just dialoguing with the UN and UN serving as the interlocutor with civil society is not going to help. That's really not an institutionalized way of taking the dialogue forward. And my last point, and this is more of a general point before Geraldine comes in, role of the private sector. From where I sit, I see the private sector as a very important player. They have the leverage, they have the ears of the government, and at times they're better than us in advocating for policy. So if we, along with the private sector, and in the context of Thailand, we've leveraged the Global Compact Network Thailand, right, which brings the private sector together. So we've leveraged the Global Compact, and I feel that leveraging together with the private sector enables us to probably push the boundaries more effectively. And we did that, and Geraldine did that during the pandemic, where she, in a dialogue with the private sector, was able to ensure that the work permits of migrants were extended, both regular and irregular. I mean, that's unheard of, that irregular migrants' work permits were extended. I mean, they didn't have work permits initially, but their stay in the country was extended, right? So I think we need to leverage that space much more as the UN. So I'm going to pause here, and Geraldine, feel free to step in.
Thanks a lot, Gita. I think that you made really, really excellent points about the need to build capacities of governments. This work requires an understanding from the government counterparts about how migration comes in as a cross-cutting issue. And it is not common knowledge among government officials. And this is where, of course, the role of UN country teams really to articulate those connections, to inform, for example, why a Ministry of Education needs to pay attention, why the Ministry of Health needs to pay attention. You are the one that have to bring the data points to them and explain that by not doing so, what is the risk that is attached to it. And I think this is where critically UN network on migration within countries are so important. But for that, how can we best support you at country level to do this work, to do this advocacy, to do this capacity development? I think that's really the heart of what we're trying to discuss today. And I could not agree more with what you said about the critical role of the private sector. Are we doing enough in reaching out to the private sector in the context of the network? I think that's a question that we can ask ourselves collectively. So again, how can we learn from the very great experiences that exist in some countries to kind of, again, bring this kind of approaches at scale across the network so we can really leverage that potential much more than what we're currently doing. So I don't know whether, Géraldine, there were some further thoughts that you wanted to add after Gita's intervention before
No,
we
I think it's
go
fine.
back to Timothy. Sorry?
It's fine. It's fine. Thank you. It was very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Géraldine. So now trying to go back to Timothy, because I see that there's still his hand raised. So will that work this time? Yes, Timothy, you're on. Please introduce yourself. We can see you, but not hear you yet. No, I'm afraid that doesn't work. So as you are trying to fix your sounds, I just wanted to kind of turn to some of the messages that came in the chat. I saw that, I think it's Carrie that was followed up on some input that Vivienne provided, particularly when it comes to these peer learning initiatives that Vivienne was flagging, and indeed I completely agree that this seems to be an important entry point for connecting with a hub. So there's a lot there that can better be leveraged or connected. And I see as well that somebody was saying that, so yeah, highlighting the importance of the reporting, so that it becomes, yes, so not reluctance, but to see that the tradition established and later it will become traditional work for government. So basically highlighting the importance of seeing this as a process. So that's I think what we can say for what's coming in the chat. And I see Carrie is also talking about the knowledge management part in relation to the connection with the peer learning. So I don't know, Carrie, is there anything that you'd like to add on this directly? Come forward, or you prefer to leave it at that?
No, I think the points in the chat were there. I think I just wanted to, and I was typing as Gita was talking about the knowledge management aspect of things. So it was actually quite nice overlapping, but it was just to say that as part of an initiative within the Secretariat and the Hub, there will be a knowledge management expert coming on board who is going to be looking more at these big macro questions about how we can be connecting the dots and creating a stronger knowledge management across and throughout the network. So that is something that is going to be happening, and it's already more than just in the pipelines. The consultants should be starting in January, and in that way, we'll actually be reaching out to a number of different stakeholders to try and get a better understanding of the needs. And now because there was an initial needs assessment done for the hub in the first place, but now we want to take it a step even further to see what the needs are from across the network, especially now that some time has passed and we've had some deeper reflections on what are the specific needs and knowledge based needs. So that was just the rationalization for putting it in the chat afterwards as well, was just to inform. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Carolyn. So shall I try again with Timothy? Would that work this time? No. So you're back on the screen now. Can you try to speak? So Timothy, what I suggest is that you put your input into the chat, because this doesn't seem to be working, I'm afraid. I saw as well that Anton Martinov put some interesting reflection in the chat, looking at, oh, Timothy, now you're in? You're on, sorry.
Hello, are you getting me now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Okay, great.
Welcome. So
okay,
please
great.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry my network has been giving some problem at my end. Well, I'm Timothy Gay. I'm the National Program and Policy Officer at IOM Liberia. And I'm specifically responsible for the coordination of the UN network on migration in Liberia. As a matter of fact, the UN network on migration in Liberia was just established a few months back, somewhere in August this year. And since its establishment, much has been done in terms of engagement with the government. The West and Central Africa region of IOM has been doing quite well in terms of giving support to the operationalization of the network in Liberia. Much engagement has been held with government stakeholders, and the government is much more enthusiastic about the work of the network. What we have not done is to engage the private sector, including the civil society organizations. As you may know, Liberia, much is not known really about the GCM in Liberia, even though Liberia was one of the countries that endorsed the GCM in Morocco. But much has not been done to really disseminate information about the network, about the GCM. Now with the establishment of the network, the UN country team, with support of the regional office, has been doing well to really engage the government. So basically, by tomorrow, at which time government, the meeting will be involving government stakeholders, we expect to also have representatives from the Liberian government to be in attendance tomorrow, and they too will be able to share their own experiences with respect to what has been done in Liberia.
Many thanks, Timothy, and also for explaining some of the work as it is developing on the African continent and some of the opportunities and challenges. So we are now coming to the end of the session, and I'd like to first of all really thank all of you that came forward with your thoughts, with your suggestions, and really acknowledging as well as some of the great input that came into the chat. Through the chat. And without further ado, I'd like now to hand over back to David, who's going to wrap up some of the main elements that came forward. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Cecile, and thanks all colleagues for sharing your experiences from the different regions and countries. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes we have a challenge in terms of implementation, which is related with the fact that some governments endorse the GCM, but then they change, new people, new politicians, and the priorities might have changed since they endorsed the GCM. And on the other hand, the UN system through the UN cities is of course supporting this implementation. So I think we need to think carefully about precisely what kind of messages, how we work with the governments at the national, local levels to precisely convince them somehow of the importance and the benefits of this implementation. And this is precisely where the network has a key role to play, and not just at the global level, but also, of course, and we have seen that in this session, at the regional and country levels, working with governments, engaging local governments too, because at the end, the migrants, they don't settle in a country. they settle in a city, they settle in specific municipalities, and we also need to work with the local level. And of course, it has been highlighted several times in this session, the different stakeholders. The private sector is key. If we want to talk about inclusion, integration, we need to have the private sector engage, providing opportunities, in particular on the labor market in terms of decent work, and working with the civil society, including migrants themselves, of course, because this is important. But I think we also need to take into account, when we talk about the civil society, it's all the civil society, and we cannot deny that there is increased negative perceptions about migration today, and we also need to work on that when we talk about implementation. Some messages in the chat talk about the fact that lots of people don't know about the GCM. We cannot forget there have been resistance somehow to the GCM at the time of the discussions. So how do we address the concerns of the public opinion? How do we address the question of sometimes a majority, not a minority of people concerned about migration? Working with trade unions, what does it mean? Not just when we talk about the private sectors, the employer side, but also the trade unions, which might feel like migrants are creating a competition. How do we work with journalists and media, talking about civil society? Because we need to somehow convey positive messages and not just doing statements that migration is positive for development, but really working with these important stakeholders that are sometimes the journalists. So this is the condition, I believe, for us as a UN network in the different levels, global, regional, and country levels, to be able to push the implementation forward, to work with these governments and different stakeholders about and talking really and implementing safe, orderly, and regular migration that, again, many people don't want to hear about, and convincing with evidence, and this is why data that have been highlighted a couple of times in this session, the importance of having data, not just about migrants themselves, but also about their contribution, how they have a positive impact in countries of origin, in countries of destination, and sometimes in countries of transit, how this positive contribution benefits everybody. So I think these messages are key, so that we can talk, for instance, about regularization. Michel Levoy was talking about the importance of regularization. I agree with that, but you need to have a strong support from the governments themselves, but also from the public opinion, or you will have a stronger resistance about that. So let's not forget, in our work, we need to engage with different stakeholders, but we also need to have this work as network at all levels about convincing and bringing evidence of the positive contribution, so that we can really work and have an impact. So thanks again for all your contributions, and looking forward to the rest of the discussions today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.